First, let me just start by saying thanks so much for sitting down with us and inviting us into your space here. Just right off the bat, what was your personal experience on September 11th, 2001?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about it these days as we're about to mark the 10th anniversary of what happened on 9/11. Like I guess millions of others, the memory of that day is seared into my insides and my heart and my mind, and you know, I can almost remember every moment at that time. I actually was in Washington. I was in Washington up on Capitol Hill, and I was briefing a group of members of Congress on some oceans issues, because I was chairman of an oceans commission, and we were briefing the members on the studies that we had done, when a fellow member on the commission leaned over to me and said, "I've just gotten word from my New York office that the trade towers have been struck by terrorists, have been attacked by terrorists." And you know, I didn't have any television around, but you know, she said, you know, that this had happened. So I shared that news with the members of Congress, that an attack had taken place, and I think there was just kind of a consensus of the moment that said we'd better all get out of there. And we did. They left, I left, I got into a car, and I was driving away from the Capitol when I heard that the Pentagon had been struck. And of course, like thousands of others, I got stuck in Washington. I couldn't find a flight out. I managed to stay with a friend, and I eventually got a chance to get a Hertz rent-a-car. I jumped in that car because I wanted to get home to California, drove across country. I think it probably in record time, about 2.5 days, just shooting straight across. But it was an amazing experience, because that trip back home, California, as I was going through the Midwest and the country, you could see America coming together, unifying as a result of that attack. There were signs on Holiday Inns that said, "God bless America." There were people that had flags out. It was obvious that America was really beginning to unify as a result of that horrible attack. And it was, in many ways, for me, it was really encouraging that you could see the great strength of this country, the great spirit of this country, responding to the worst terrorist attack we've ever had in our history. And America, just like we did on Pearl Harbor, came together and said, we're not going to let that happen again.
From that point, sir, the DoD's been through so much during the past 10 years. You know, the military has changed. Prior to this, we were looking more at a conventional warfare mindset. Is counterterrorism the new mindset of defense heading into the future?
You know, we've changed as a result of the threats and the crises that we're confronting in the world. During the Cold War, you know, we were confronting, you know, one large Soviet Union that represented the other superpower in the world, that threatened everything that we stood for. And in many ways, it kind of simplified, you know, our directions and what we had to be concerned about. Since the fall of the Iron Curtain, we have now begun to deal with a series of different kinds of threats. And so today we face not just one kind of threat, not just one kind of crisis, but a series of threats in a number of areas. I mean, in my 40 years in Washington, I've never seen, you know, as many different challenges that we confront. We're looking at, obviously, the continuing war against terrorism. And that has us involved in Pakistan, going after Al-Qaeda and the Fatah. We're going after Al-Qaeda in Yemen and Somalia, North Africa. So going after those terrorists who would attack this country as they did on 9/11 is one of those areas that we've got to confront. We're involved in wars. I mean, we have a war in Iraq, a war in Afghanistan, and although we're beginning to transition down, the fact is every day our men and women are on the battle line getting shot at and getting killed. These are wars, and we're involved in 2 of those. We just came off a NATO mission in Libya. That's involved us in an alliance that we're part of, but we're using military might to try to work with our NATO partners in that effort. We're dealing with the concerns about Iran and North Korea, rogue countries that are developing, trying to develop nuclear capability and threaten the world with that. We're dealing with cyber attacks now that come at us almost every day, and having to respond and be defensive about how that impacts on us. And then we're dealing with rising powers in the world. China, Russia's still there. Brazil, India, these are all rising powers that we've got to be able to work with, hopefully, but ultimately could have a huge impact in terms of the stability of the world. So every one of those areas is a major threat we have to face, and as a result, the military, our defense system, has to be flexible enough to respond to each of these threats. The defense of not only the present but the future has to be agile, has to be flexible, and has to be quickly deployable.
What would you say about the men and women who have joined to serve during these last 10 years, the 9/11 generation, so to speak? We've seen them adapt. What would you say about that generation specifically within the military?
As tragic as 9/11 was, and it was tragic, obviously for the close to 3,000 families that suffered the death of someone close to them, there's nothing that can replace a loved one, and that was tragic. But out of this kind of tragedy, I think we've drawn tremendous inspiration in this country to come together. And the greatest reflection of that inspiration are the men and women who have volunteered to serve in our military. We now have, I think, the strongest volunteer force in the history of this country. And it's not just, obviously, the men and women who serve in the Marines and the Navy and the Air Force and the Army. It's the men and women who serve in the reserves and in the National Guard who have also been called upon to respond. This really has been a national mobilization of spirit and effort and commitment that I think is unprecedented. And it's one of the most encouraging things for me as Secretary of Defense, because I know I have the very best military in the world. Why? Because of the men and women who've been willing to leave their homes, put their lives on the line, and fight on behalf of the safety of this country. The strength of our defense system is not in the weapons we have, it's in the men and women who are serving out there every day.
And sir, when we talk about the way things have changed over the years, the Reserve and the Guard has done so much in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but with 9/11 specifically, how did that change the way we do business, whether it be between agencies communicating or our coalition partners, international partners around the world? What changed during this past decade in that regard?
Well, I was an intelligence officer in the Army a long time ago, and I remember when I was an intelligence officer, I was in the Army, and I was kind of working in the Army, never talked to the Navy, never talked to the Marines, never talked to any other services, basically operated in my own little stovepipe. My youngest son was in the Navy Reserve. I was an intelligence officer and got mobilized and was sent to Afghanistan. And there he was. He went to Fort Bragg. You think he didn't go to a Navy base? He went to Fort Bragg.
There's no ships there.
No ships there. He goes to Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. no oceans there. And he's suddenly sitting beside CIA, Special Forces. Every service is represented in that operation. And it's a reflection of the joint forces that we now have, which I think represents a real strength for the United States. Our ability to have each of the services working together jointly, to be able to go into an area, to work together, to bring all of our strengths together, this is really unique. It gives us, I think, a kind of added strength that we haven't had in the past. I mean, you know, we've fought past wars, and obviously we've done well in most of those wars, but to have the capability to bring all of these forces together to unify, whether it's in Iraq or Afghanistan, whether it's against terrorism, I just think makes us that much stronger. And that, I think that is one of the things we have seen over the last 10 years that has made us much more capable to respond to these myriad of threats that we're facing today.
And sir, as we look forward to the 10th anniversary coming up this Sunday, you're going to be participating in a service project. How do you feel, or how do you see America commemorating this date? This is kind of a pain that we have to deal with every year, but how would you recommend folks commemorate it in their own way?
You know, I think like every tragedy, like 9/11, and you know, what we went through in Pearl Harbor and what we went through in other tragedies, that if people would just, you know, take a moment to reflect on what happened. I mean, for those that that have faith, I think to be able to go to a church and spend a little time in that church, kind of talking to God and reflecting on what took place. And not only, I think, put the victims of what happened on that day in your prayers and in your thoughts, but also say a prayer for this country and the ability of this country to kind of find what is really the greatest strength we have. And it's that spirit that's reflected in the men and women who serve in uniform, who are willing to come together, who are willing to fight, who are willing to sacrifice in order to defend this country. Our strength, our greatest strength, I mean, you know, we have a special role in the world, but our greatest strength in confronting that kind of leadership role that we have to face is the men and women who are willing to serve and who are willing to fight together. I mean, I think we need to pray that the leadership of this country learns a lesson from that men and women who are willing to put their lives on the line and sacrifice and make the ultimate sacrifice in order to defend this country, if they can do that, then surely the leadership of this country can make a small sacrifice of working together in order to govern this country. If people can put all of that into their prayers, I think that's a great way to remember 9/11.
Sir, thank you so much for your time. Again, we really appreciate you sitting down with us.
Thanks very much. Nice to be with you.
Thank you, sir.